Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second day of Forum 2000 and to our panel where we will be discussing illiberal foreign policies within the Western Alliance. My name is Zsuzsanna Végh. I'm a program officer at the German Marshall Fund, and it is my honor to tackle these important and no less challenging questions with four distinguished panelists. To my left, Pavel Žáček, chair of the Committee on Security in the Chamber of Deputies of the Czech Republic. To his left, Ehsassi, who is a chair of the Foreign Affairs and International Development Committee of the Parliament of Canada. Then, opposite to me, Sarah Repucci, who is an expert on democracy and has formerly been with Freedom House and the Economist group. And to my right, Hegedüs, Regional Director for Central Europe at the German Marshall Fund. So when we are talking about illiberal parties, illiberal governments, of course, they show quite a diversity. We can think of far-right parties, we can think of generally populist, left-wing, illiberal parties. And I think a lot has been said about their impact on democracy in general. But with these forces being stronger and stronger across Europe and beyond, I think it is time that we start to consider what their impact may be on the international alliance. We have seen illiberal forces staying in power long in countries within the EU, within NATO, and their behavior at times have been particularly challenging if you think of Hungary and its attitude towards Russia, China, Ukraine. It poses quite some challenge to NATO and the EU. At the same time, we have seen also illiberal governments a little bit north from us in Poland that did not particularly challenge the unity, integrity of our Western alliance. So it's a puzzling question. Can we really predict how such parties, when in government, how they will behave? So that would be my first question to Dania, to set the scene a little bit. You have been looking at such forces, such parties, and how they approach their international role. Can we find any determinants based on which we could predict how illiberal forces behave when in government and whether or not they would pose a challenge to the Western Alliance?
Thank you so much, Zsuzsanna, and good morning, dear colleagues. Actually setting the scene, I would like to deep dive in this question. So we have seen the emergence of illiberal and I would say also multivectoral foreign policies over the past couple of years. Interestingly, not only at the border between the Western Alliance system and, for example, Eurasian great powers, but also within the West. And the question is, when can we see the emergence of multivectoral foreign policies? I would like to argue that this is actually in very close connection with domestic autocratization. Why and how? We know that actually the international environment has a direct impact on democratization. That's a very old story. We know that from the beginning of the 90s. That's linkage leverage theory of Lewitsky and Végh, that the closer the ties are to the West and the bigger the influence of the Western democratic core is over a country, the better are the chances of democratization. What we very often forget, and sorry for being so cynical, that how utterly difficult it might be to autocratize within a democratic superstructure like the European Union. Because obviously it has a democratic pressure on the autocratizing governments, autocratizing incumbents, and tries to change the behavior. And obviously autocratic incumbents have to neutralize that sort of democratic environmental effect. And they use foreign policy for that purpose. As Zsuzsanna already mentioned, over the past, I would say now 15 years, we have seen the emergence of a couple of illiberal governments with a significant democratic erosion path and also authoritarian track record in the case of Hungary. And I would like to argue that together with this, we have seen two models of foreign policy which help the autocratization. One is the Polish model. And actually, in the case of Poland, I think there is nothing new under the sun. That's the same strategy and the same behavior. Radical right dictatorship used to conduct and pursue in the 60s and 70s within NATO. The Greek military junta, Portugal under Salazar, actually trading geopolitical loyalty for non-intervention. And it worked pretty well, especially with the United States, not so well with the European Commission, but it was definitely, I would say, the more future-proof, or appeared to be the more future-proof model of autocratization after the full-scale invasion in the February of 22. And why I'm arguing that this is a model, because there are other countries which are using this blueprint, first and foremost, actually, Italy, but I think we will see in the future also other governments pursuing that path. And then we have already mentioned the Hungarian model. The Hungarian model is built on multivectoralism, and this is in the focus of our today's discussion. Practically, it's built on the logic of geopolitical disloyalty, using as leverage the position within Western institutions and blocking decision-making. We know that very well from the Hungarian government. And also using the strategic ties built to the great contenders of Western powers, Russia, China, again, as leverage over the Western partners and as a tool to symbolize that the country and the government has strategic alternatives if pressure from the European Union would be too big due to authoritarian developments in the country. And why I'm arguing that the Hungarian model is also a model. You could mention that we haven't seen other country in the Western alliance system with so close ties to Russia and China and with such a disruptive behavior at the level of EU decision-making. Just consider the continuous watering down of the sanction packages with regard to Russia, the continuous blockade of the financial and military aid to Ukraine. We haven't seen such behavior in other cases in such extent. Actually, I think there are two determinants based on which we can decide whether an illiberal government will pursue the Polish model or the multivectoralism-based Hungarian one. And this is whether there is an elite and social consent in the country on the geopolitical anchoring of the nation, or this consent is lacking and there are competitive models. In the case of Poland, we know that with regard to domestic politics, Poland is one of the most polarized societies potentially in Europe, but there is a consent with regard who is the security and foreign policy enemy of the country, who is posing the challenge, and who are the friends. And we could mention in a couple of Central and Eastern European countries where this elite and social consent is fundamentally missing. And we also see illiberal and potentially further authoritarian developments there. We could mention Slovakia, we could mention Bulgaria. And in this regard, I am not arguing and stating that we have to mention these countries at the same level as Hungary, but I think we can seriously consider that the structural determinants of autocratization-based multivectoral foreign policy in the future are given in the case of Slovakia and Bulgaria as well. And just summing up, when can we see the tipping point? Actually, then when the domestic developments actually call such a European or potentially NATO reaction based on which a government does not necessarily have further options just to move in the direction of multivectoralism, seek new alliances, or potentially try to use EU decision-making processes, veto right, as a leverage to defend itself. And we have seen that multiple times in the case of Hungary with regard to the European Union. And potentially, I think these are the developments what we need to consider. We have actually swing states within the Western alliance system. Hungary is obviously one with divided loyalties not only to the West, but also to Russia and China. And the big question is, how many such swing states can we endure in the Western alliance system without actually the system breaking down? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Speaking about the Western alliance system, of course, a core actor in this constellation is the United States. And we are just 3 weeks away from the presidential elections. And looking ahead, the outcome still seems to be quite uncertain. It could go either way. And one question that often arises, how a potential second Trump administration would look like, given former President Trump's previous track record. Also, his foreign policy seems to be quite unpredictable on many levels. And he has, Daniel mentioned, Hungary and the Hungarian example extensively. Former President Trump has certainly built close ties with the Hungarian Prime Minister in recent years. Now, I'm in no way suggesting that Hungary is a big player enough to influence former President Trump. But I do think that there's a sort of affinity between the two, and I'm wondering how a Trump-led United States would operate under the current circumstances in our alliance. What do you think, Sarah?
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. There's a lot up in the air right now, right? We don't know where the election will land. All of us will be up very late that night. And Trump, as you said, is very unpredictable, and we don't really know. I think what we do know is that if he is elected, he will be very challenging for global democracy and for the Euro alliance. I think that he's going to erode American institutions, and that will have a knock-on effect on fragile democracies around the world and the American example that they look to. And there will also be a lot of challenges in foreign policy. The Republican Party has evolved a lot since the last Trump administration, and I think that, at least in my opinion, the advisors that Trump surrounded himself with the last time around are unlikely to be the dominant force in a second Trump administration. I think that there is a new agenda in the Republican Party now, and it's built much more around Trumpism as opposed to the administration being filled with people who were trying to hold him back, which was much more dominant in the last administration. And that means that Trump's ideas may have more of a free rein, but it also means that there are new ideas that will be brought into the administration, a new outlook for what American foreign policy should look like. In terms of what we know that Trump is not really interested in traditional diplomacy. He's not very interested in traditional alliances. He does believe that might is right, and he also loves to look powerful personally and to gain power for himself through the power that the United States has. I think the big foreign policy points that are very relevant to Europe are what his policy will be on Ukraine, which in the past he's not been very supportive, but the war has progressed quite a bit since he's been gone, and US support for Ukraine has been very solid over the last 4 years. We know that he's disdainful of NATO. I don't know exactly what that will look like, but we know that he has a tendency to make policy in the moment, within the span of a conversation, and that his current vice president and the others around him seem to focus on making coherence out of the random things that he might say. They've done that on immigration already and are likely to do that in foreign policy as well. Tariffs, I think, will be a big issue. Trump put tariffs in place in the past. He's said that he will increase them. That has divided the transatlantic alliance in the past and could be very divisive for Europe as well. So I think that the Europeans are going to need to adapt should Trump be elected. If he is elected, I think it will probably be a long time before a traditional politician is back in place, and so we can't just weed it out. There is quite a high risk of Europe being divided under a Trump administration, and quite the opposite is what is needed, right? If Trump is elected, what will be most needed will be a united front among the countries that are still standing for traditional democracy. So I'll pause there.
Thank you very much, Sarah. You certainly did not decrease the anticipation for the next 3 weeks. But I'm turning to Ali now. With illiberal forces in power across the Western Alliance, and with the eye on a potential second Trump administration, how do you see Canada's role in ensuring or working towards ensuring the integrity and the unity of the alliance? And just to piggyback on that question, specifically about Canada's role, I'm also wondering, given the country's track record in supporting democracy, civil society around the world, do you see a role within the Western Alliance for taking up such positions for the country?
Well, thank you very much for that, Zsuzsanna, and thank you also for the panel you were part of yesterday, which was an incredibly informing one. So, as Sarah has rightly pointed out, I think we are going to be up for some time the night of the election in the U.S. But the reality of the matter is, I think what we have been doing over the course of the past several years is that we have mostly focused on illiberal states. I think one dimension that isn't really focused on as much as it should is the fact that we should also be very much focused on the illiberal strain in all our respective countries. So one expression that is often used in Canada, and as you can imagine, the transatlantic relationship is very important to us. Our relationship with the US is very important to us. But one expression that is often used, which tells you how we are all affected by strains in our respective countries, is that we have this expression, we say when someone sneezes in the US, you know Canada's going to come down with a cold. So once those strains, actually, those illiberal strains are fortified in Europe, or they're fortified in the US, it obviously affects our resolve as well, because the bedrock of public support, which is so incredibly necessary to make sure that we're fully engaged, we're focused, we have the resolve and the resilience to be there during difficult times like this, that starts to fray, it starts to dissipate. So obviously we're concerned about developments in the US, but we want to make sure that we are at that table and that we are focused on all of the challenges we currently face. One example of this as to how those sentiments actually do move from one country to another is you will recall that insofar as Congress was concerned, they held up aid to Ukraine for approximately, I think it was 10 months. And during that process, there was a period where I would get together with European colleagues, which included Pavel Fischer as well. And we refer to ourselves as the Musketeers, and we would head down to Washington together, Europeans and Canadians, to speak to US Congress about how incredibly imperative it was that the US continue to support Ukraine. During that period, we do know that there was a lot of misinformation or disinformation that was going around with respect to developments in Ukraine. So when that strain was happening in the US and everyone was fully aware of that, we also saw, regrettably, some Ukraine fatigue amongst the public in Canada as well. So these are things that we have to guard against. These are things that should concern us all because, again, these are difficult times. They're trying times for all our respective countries, but we have to lean in. We have to do a better job. We have to do the burden sharing that is so essential to making sure whether it's our alliances, whether it's NATO, that we all do our part. Times like this, again, the theme of the conference here is resolve and resilience. So if we want to make sure that we are squarely focused on those challenges, we have to recognize also that a threat that does actually happen to that consensus upon which these multilateral institutions were built is really a threat to us all and behooves us to be more engaged and to be part of the solution.
Thank you very much. So if I understand correctly, generally you suggest, and this is something that I would like to come back later on to as well, is to proactively also look inside and address similar strains and similar thoughts rising. We will later on talk about potential mitigation actions, but I think this already speaks to that. Pavel, now I would like to, last but not least, turn to you and ask for the Czech and the regional perspective to be more broad in that sense. We have seen illiberals taking power in the region, and this does pose a challenge, as Ali said, not only to these countries, but to the alliance, NATO, EU as well. But the Czech Republic has been supportive of Ukraine in that particular case, and it has played a constructive role overall in the Western alliance. How do you see the country's role or potential role in stepping up against illiberal tendencies in the region, potentially in alliance with other regional partners? And if I may, I would ask for your predictions. What can we expect in the next years, depending on a potential election result the next year?
Thank you for that not simple questions. I will start from the last point. I believe that Czech democracy is so strong that we will keep together our political system after next year, after next parliamentary elections. Of course, we started the discussion, and we can feel even in our political discourse these liberal moments or using the PR from these movements which are trying to touch the unity which we need not just in the very, very complicated processes, looking for compromise across the EU, but even in NATO. So our integration in NATO seems most important point for the balance, not just transatlantic relations, but especially situation in EU. And for this time, and I would like to present that we will continue in that the policy to Russia, because we all feel even our partners in Slovakia, even our partners in Hungary, what I know from our last meeting in our parliament, V4, which we faced migration processes, migration crisis, migration pact, and help to Ukraine. So I believe that we have a lot of homeworks. Now I will speak a little bit like acting politician, not like historian or journalist. Independent, and I believe and we feel that it's very necessary to communicate with our partners, even with these partners which are trying to create this illiberal system or to support that, and there is no way not to communicate, there is no way not to speak. We are in such a important international institutions that we have to present our own values, we have to present our own interests, you know, it's very necessary. I don't believe, of course there are some exceptions like Russia for these days, or some other countries which are not democratic, but on the other hand, among us, especially in EU, with our very complicated past, with our very complicated way to find the consensus, we have to discuss among each other, and it's our duty. Mm-hmm. But I feel I'm optimistic. I'm an optimist, and I believe that we will do our job, and we will still be a strong member. And of course, we have to be ready for the result of US elections. I think it's important to say. And of course, we are forcing the EU common communication to our US partners. On the other hand, at this point from Prague, from the Czech Republic, we have to be ready even to communicate and to be ready for that split. It can be, we will not. We are not so powerful to influence it. That we will talk mainly for Central and East European countries, which are mainly feeling the same situation, the same position, especially to Russian Federation.
Thank you very much. I will soon turn also to our audience, but before doing so, I wanted to take a next step in our discussion, talking about what we can do about the situation. And Ali has already touched a little bit on that, and I have a sense that Pavel highlighting the discussions about our values and reiterating what we stand for is really going in a similar direction. We need to make it clear what is the foundation of our Western alliance, what are the values and principles that we stand for and that unites all of us. And when there are challenges arising, internal or external, we need to call a spade and act rather sooner than later. When, however, we see such internal challenges rising, I would like to ask our panelists to share their thoughts, maybe brainstorm a little. What can international partners really do? So not only talking about looking around at our house and making sure that it's in order, but what is the leverage or what kind of potential incentives partners within the alliance have at hand that can impact the illiberal forces and can mitigate the effect that they have on the unity and the integrity of the alliance. Who may I ask first? Daniel, would you like to jump in?
Thank you. I don't know whether I can deliver the definite answers to your questions, but I think the first step is to recognize our failures, how we get into this position. And I think the West, but particularly the European Union, has a very bad characteristic and behavior, which is that as long as problems are manageable in their size and extent, they rarely reach the attention level that they would be addressed. And I think we have seen the same, both in the European Union, but in broader sense in the Western alliance system when it comes to the protection of democratic integrity. And I would start just with some change of perception in two dimensions. First, I think we need to recognize that our previous narrative based on a strong focus on foreign meddling and disinformation is just part of the whole story. Those illiberal populist parties which have close ties to Russia and try to introduce both domestic autocratization and multivectoral foreign policies, they are not puppets. They are not useful idiots. They are not doing what they are doing because they got orders from Moscow, but they are doing that because they are realist and rational political entrepreneurs. And they are pursuing their own domestic agenda with all of these moves. And we need to recognize that actually the biggest challenge to the integrity of the Western alliance system are potentially our elites, or part of our elites, who pose or try to represent that alternative within our democratic systems. And the second change in perception I would argue for is that you mentioned that we need to clarify what are the values, what connect us and keep the Western alliance system together. I would argue that we reevaluate the importance of these values. Democracy is not about values. Having high level of democratic integrity, having democratic resilience is our primary realist security interest. This is how we can keep our alliance system together. So forget this idealist, realist distinction and don't think that only idealists are using democratic and value-based arguments. This is our primary realist interest to act according to these values. And I'm stopping here.
Thank you very much, Daniel.
If I can disagree a little bit,
please.
In the very specific point, of course, we are all democratic countries. We do democratic policy, and of course there is still, huge place for opposition, which is criticizing establishment, governments, the other political parties. On the other hand, if they are in a clear link with Russia, for example, they can be called useful idiots. If they are supporting, if they got money, if they got other support, there was some investigation this spring. It was all a network built by Russian secret services across Europe. We can call them definitely. If it's not just from, some ground of domestic policy, and if are in a connection, if they are paid, if they are part of this network, we have to call them useful idiots, like in Brezhnev's or Lenin's era. Yeah.
If I may just with one phrase, yes, but they are not the main challengers. And actually the problem is that we are not all democratic countries anymore. So the country I have the citizenship of is certainly not a democratic country in the Western alliance system.
But I think something that both of you are pointing to is that there are certain domestic actors who may or may not have their own agenda as well. But at the same time, they are playing in the hands of, in this case, Russia. So useful idiot or not, but they are certainly multi-purpose. They serve the interests of Russia in this case as well, and they also do serve their own interest with it, which is, in the case of Hungary that you are referring to, is to keep their grasp on power. But moving back also to potential mitigation measures, Sarah, what do you think? You have quite an extensive understanding of how we can secure democracy. How can we secure our international democratic alliance against such challengers?
I think, coming from the US perspective, Europe is really resilient. The countries in Europe have been through so much more than we have been through in the United States, and have asserted their allegiance to democracy repeatedly and in many deep ways. So I think leaning back on that and having some faith in the European system, I think is important. I agree with what you all have said about leaning on the values. I think another area to think about is the parts of the United States that Europe can work with that will still be close to those values. As Ali was saying, the US Congress can be a detractor, but can also be an ally. And I think it's, the models are showing that it's unlikely that the entire US Congress goes to one party. So there will be powerful Democrats who are still there. I think it's also important for Europe to look elsewhere in the world for democratic allies and like-minded governments in Asia, in Latin America, in Africa. I think it's more important than ever that we think about democracy in a global sense and not always stay focused on countries that have been democratic for a certain amount of time. Or that think about democracy in a purely Western sense. There's a lot of strength and resilience and creativity in other parts of the world that can be drawn on as well.
Thank you very much. So we should broaden our perspectives and views as well. Ali, would you like to add anything to what you previously mentioned?
I agree with Sarah. I think one of the additional challenges that we do face in North America, whether it be in the United States or Canada, is that isolationist tendency. When things are out of hand, one should understand that in our respective countries, that isolationism does rear its ugly head, if you will. So it's an additional burden that we should guard against. For that to happen, for us to be fully engaged, I think all of our politicians should, first of all, do a much better job of communicating. We understand how disinformation works. We understand how they are so incredibly good at pulling at heartstrings to make their arguments. And so, as elected officials in particular, I think we have to do a much better job communicating with the public as to why it is so incredibly important that we continue to work with our allies, that we continue to be engaged. And we have to learn not just to do it on an intellectual level, but also on an emotional level as well. So one tool, I think, which is very, very helpful is to point out how these autocracies are constantly working together, building those linkages, assisting each other. So once you do point out those facts and the pattern of behavior that we're seeing, for example, in Ukraine, as you know full well, we do know that North Korea is assisting Russia. We do know that Iran is assisting Russia, whether it be with drones or with missiles. We do know that Cubans are even assisting the Russians. So the more we can unpack that, explain that to individuals in our country, the more they will recognize what the threat is. Lastly, I would say one of the things we do see as we have a multiplicity of crises around the world is sometimes no one's willing to assume responsibility. And this is something that was highlighted in your panel yesterday. As we see certain members of the EU, for example, assume a la carte approach to their obligations, there was this vacuum where no one was willing to step forward and try to fix the problem. Everyone was saying, well, hopefully another institution or another member of the EU can fix this. We can't do that. We have to all assume our responsibilities. And in Canada, what we do like to say when it comes to multilateralism is we like to think of ourselves as helpful fixers. There are obviously gaps that do occur when you are part of an alliance. And so we're always going to be mindful of that and always ready and willing and hopefully able to fill that gap to the best of our abilities so the crises that we are dealing with are dealt with, they're addressed, and that we're forceful in responding to all these challenges.
Thank you very much, Ali. Pavel, would you like to add anything?
I definitely believe in the role of public persons in this process, in this specific situation. I can sign everything in that point. On the other hand, I don't believe that there is a way for the US to get back this isolationist policy. Both candidates who are running for president's office, they understand that they have to be really open, really focused on Indo-Pacific region. So it means, in any case, US officials, US Army, US services will focus on that. The main problem for us will be the quality of communication, quality of cooperation between the US and EU. It can change somehow. We have to work for that. We have to definitely keep together our transatlantic relations. But I believe that there will be the main change. So I don't believe that there will the US. Even I know that some internal political groups are for that, but still for the US, if I can say it this way, it's much cheaper to be open to understand the role, the US role in a changing world. And still looking for the partners, and we are really like partners, and we have to be ready after the campaign will be ended. There will be a result, and we will look to the future for next some years. There is a lot of problems, a lot of crises, and the US has the power. The US has that role to fix these problems, and definitely we will agree. I mean, all of us that we like democratic world did some mistakes. We did some really problematic results, and now we have to work together to fix it. Definitely, that's our. Again, I will say it's our duty, common duty.
Thank you very much. I will not yet summarize what you have all said, I'm still digesting, and while I do that, I would like to ask our audience whether there are any questions. We still have a good 10 minutes of the panel to go. If you do, then please also say your name and your organization. Thank you.
My name is Dele. I'm from Nigeria, Africa. EU had taken decisions in the past that had been landmark decisions that even Americans had at all. Look at decisions on monopoly by Google. Look at current policy reform and policy discussions on AI that EU is taking, that America does not have the gut to take at the moment. So the question then is, why does Europe continue to look on to America as a super nation? Why has Europe not developed a super nation that gathers the rest of the countries within Europe the way America has done? Why are we looking out of Europe for leadership and not within Europe?
Thank you very much. And I also had a question here, just to collect, and then I would give the floor to the panelists.
Well, very interesting conversation. Juan Pio Hernandez from Plan País, an organization that works with the Venezuelan diaspora on migration issues. I have a question about kind of like what I call imposed agendas. Like within the classical liberal thought or liberal thought, there are some axioms that we consider absolute, and there's some factions within our democratic forces that already jump to conclusions when a lot of the population is not ready in issues like climate change, in issues like gender, equity, and all this. And we have acted not providing the democratic spaces for the society to have these debates. What can we do to, I related to what you said, that democracy is not a value, but sorting out what the common values that unite us is something very important. And we have seen it in the countries that have been very successful integrating migrants that, in the case of the US, has easily forgotten. They have forgotten of all the integration cases where people who came from all over the world not consider themselves Americans. For example, in my case, my family came from Spain, Cuba, Venezuela, and America. And in every generation, we have taken some of the things that came from our culture, but we have integrated that we consider ourselves citizens of where we are. So that's something that put to the debate about imposed agendas, and also the role of integration, that our values will come up on top if we don't fear in the space that we've developed them.
Thank you very much. I don't see other hands for now, so I would turn to our panelists. So we have a question regarding the role of the EU. Why is it still looking outside to the US? Why isn't it developing into a more united structure like the United States have? And we have another question about essentially the value of integrating various perspectives from different communities, and how can we, what can we do to provide such spaces that do this job for us in our democracies. And I think from various angles, but both are actually fairly important questions when it comes to addressing illiberal challengers and how they impact the alliance. Who would like to jump in on either of the questions?
I will try to start with the integration of Europe. We cannot compare the situation when was established the US, like the state, I mean federal state, like superpower across North American continent. It was a really specific historical role, historical time, and so on. EU, like political structure, was the result of World War II, like the result of our bloody history, and the reaction on many differences, in social way, historical way, reaction on the interests of national state in Europe. So it's not simple, and we cannot definitely compare it with the EU or Europe, and Great Britain is a very good example. That's not linear way from or to the federal state. It's not a simple process, and that's the result. That's why we cannot even establish, discuss and create a united foreign policy. We are discussing about common security because it's a national point. And many problems we have to discuss on a very specific procedure which are not maybe understandable for our partners abroad. But it's like this. I don't know if I can say that we are all doing our best, but still, it's a result of our past. It's a result of our complicated past, that we were facing many viruses such as totalitarianism and so on. And what can I say at the end? That the pressure from abroad, like from Russian Federation, I mean through this very bloody war against Ukraine, it's something which opens very special place for this dialogue. We have to get back to the grounds and to start to change our minds, and to discuss our recent interests and common interests.
Thank you very much. Indeed, the history and the context of Europe is definitely different from that of the US, and we feel the impact of that. Alice or Daniel, would any of you like to take?
Sure, I'll take a stab at it, if you will. I just found it very interesting that on the one hand, one of the questions was about the need for EU to pull closer together. And then the follow-up question to that was the imposition of perspectives and views from above. And I think that really tells you what the challenge is. Even if one were to accept that that is the best approach, if EU does pull even closer together, then you would have charges that this is something that's driven by elites, and that it's not supported necessarily by the public. So we have to guard against these things. We have to make sure that approaches that are decided upon, again, do have that bedrock of public support, which is so necessary to do.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Daniel.
I'll more sort of take inspiration from the questions rather than answer them directly, but I agree that we're not going to have a United States of Europe, but I do think that it goes back to our conversation about finding the common ground among Europe, and that's where the strength will come from. And so, maybe we won't have a full federation in Europe, but there can be deeper integration that can help balance out the role that the United States may not be playing in the future. And on the point about migration and integration, I think it reminds me of the fact that liberal actors within an illiberal system have been failing, or liberal actors in liberal systems that are faced with these forces have been losing the storytelling game in terms of what liberal democracy has to offer. And this is something we've been all saying for years, but I still think that it's true, and I think that the adoption of certain illiberal policies among democratic actors has been one response, but it would be even more encouraging if we could see liberal Democrats taking on more of the storytelling strengths of populist parties and explaining what democracy does have to offer and why it is a better option for people's future than siding with these actors.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Daniel, I would like to give you the floor for a very short intervention, and then I would sum up, because unfortunately we are reaching the end of our time.
Thank you. Then I will try to forget for a second that I'm an Atlanticist and answer the question why to look at the US. I'm old enough to remember what was the Lisbon strategy in my university years, that wanted to make Europe the most competitive region of the world for 2010. Since then, practically we lost the competition in digital technologies to the United States. We lost the edge in environmental technologies to China. We completely ruined our solar sector, and we are at completely ruining actually our renewable sector as well. The European Union's performance in actually developing own resources, positions, and an own role at the geopolitical stage over the past 20 years was, excuse me, abysmal. Practically over the past 15 years, European growth strategy related on a triangle that was reliance on US security guarantees, reliance on cheap Russian energy import, and reliance on access to Chinese markets that we can export. That was certainly the German model, and as such, it gave the core of the European growth model as well. And I think from this we can do two conclusions. First, all of the relationships which the European Union created as alternatives were even more dangerous than the transatlantic one. Dependence on Russian energy, dependence on Chinese markets actually created dependencies that threatened European sovereignty, strategic sovereignty, much more than dependence from the United States. And second one, we lost the Russian energy over the past 5 years. We are losing the access to Chinese markets. Would the European Union also lose US security guarantees? I don't think so, that it would be sustainable. Honestly, I'm convinced, and I'm coming back to the role of being an Atlanticist. The United States and the European Union are stronger together. The EU is definitely stronger with the United States playing a role as a security guarantor in Europe. And I'm only arguing to my American friends that, believe or not, the US also needs allies, and the United States is stronger with Europe as an ally. The demographic economic role of the West is shrinking globally. If we still would like to keep a critical mass at the global stage, then I think the only alternative is transatlantic cooperation. Even if the US is pivoting to Asia, even if the EU is building strategic autonomy, I think we simply need each other. And these are just the realist arguments, but ultimately we also have shared values. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dania. And unfortunately, I think maybe the discussion would start to pick up more in the panel now, but we have to finish. So I'm also trying to attempt to draw some conclusions from your input. And one of the key things I see rising across is the importance of what we tell about ourselves and how we communicate it. Dania has made a compelling case now for the strength of the transatlantic alliance and why it matters, why it's valuable. And I would say, although you are trying to position it as a realist argument, it is also something that I think taps into an emotional reservoir, which Ali highlighted is also highly important when we are trying to address the various challenges that are arising. Sarah has mentioned the importance of seeking out allies even in dire situations and seeking out those partners who, in this case, Europe may be able to work with should we see an illiberal turn in the United States. And I think this also highlights the importance of generally communication that Pavel was touching upon quite a bit, that we need to communicate our values, we need to find our partners, we need to communicate what we stand for and find a common ground. Ultimately, I agree with Sarah that we need better storytelling about our democracies, why it matters, and why it matters domestically, but why it matters internationally for our alliances. But we may need to look for new partners, not just within, but outside, and get other countries, maybe newer democracies, on board from across the globe. With that, I would like to thank you all for your time and for spending the past hour with us. I wish you a very inspiring conference for the rest of the day and great networking. And we will then move on to our next sessions, I guess. Thank you very much for all our panelists for being here.